And one of them in the last 5 years had this focus on metastatic uveal melanoma. I'm sure you care as much about the topic as we do. So we were delighted that we as Patient Network could join the project as project partners. So we are project partners in there, like the clinicians or everyone else. And we thought we share a little bit first with you how we work, because we come from a little bit of a different space, and then our thoughts on why we think patients should be involved in research in general. And that's the part I'm going to cover. And then we thought Andrew, actually, because we make a lot of use of his experience in his brain as a startup person and working for a startup accelerator, and he will demonstrate a tool that we've been using for our work with you, and we hope that it takes you, just that gives you a little bit of a flavor for how we work and what we do. Okay, and with that, I am going to start with my presentation. And we are called MPNE, which stands for Melanoma Patient Network Europe. And it is actually not a patient organization as such. We obviously have a registered entity, but we are a network. And I started the network after losing my husband to melanoma in 2012. And my husband died of cutaneous melanoma. And as you will be aware, that is the most frequent form of melanoma. However, already very early on, we had already patients with rare forms of melanoma, and most of these rare forms were then uveal melanoma coming to us, and we weren't quite appropriately able to help them. And I would like to walk you a little bit through the structure we've built over the last years and how we now are able to support our rare melanoma patients, and I think increasingly well. Now you have to think of this, so you should be seeing lots of little blue-greenish dots. These are our melanoma patients or carers of a melanoma patient, so family members or friends or siblings. Often these people group, and you can think of actually that these groups, these little groups, should actually be colored in independent colors, because we're based in Europe and countries have independent languages. We have 28 official languages in the European Union, and unfortunately, not everyone is able to speak English. So there's only a subset, about a quarter of adults in Europe speaks English, and that is obviously not enough to read a medical paper. So what we decided to do is we are going to find people in these networks who do speak English. These would be the red ones. And then what we do is we connect these people across Europe. What you achieve by that is if you get people connected and talking to each other, that creates a highway, communication highway, if you want, to transfer information across language and country boundaries very, very fast. And that was the original motivation for doing so. Because you might be aware, cutaneous melanoma was where uveal melanoma is right now. A few years ago, that was when my husband was diagnosed, and we had a couple of new therapies coming through. And access to these therapies was only available in clinical trials. So understanding how clinical trials worked, which trials were relevant and how to access them was critical for our people. And the intent was to get this type of information across language barriers fast. And I do believe we have achieved that. Now, of course, this thing doesn't work alone. So there are a few people who organize the overall structure. That would be one of someone like me or someone on the uveal side like Andrew. So because, of course, something requires more organization than just activity on country level. It's important to note that all of this is run by volunteers, so we don't have any employees or so. So we all we do this often in addition to full-time jobs. We are a totally lean, low-budget enterprise, but I think it's like we are an example of what is possible if you pay enough attention to the connection between people and invest enough in these connections. So I would like to walk you a little bit through what we do and how we use this network that I'm just showing you. We spent some time thinking about what it takes to be successful in advocacy, and it boiled down to three what we call pillars. And the first slide, this first version for that I made for ESMO, for the ESMO, European Society for Medical Oncology, where I've been chairing the patient advocacy working group for a couple of years between 2014 and 2018. And I was responsible there for the patient advocacy track at the annual conferences. So that's ESMO's a bit the European version of ASCO, if you like. And I made this slide for the very, very first advocacy track that we had there. In our opinion, what it takes in order to be successful in what we're doing is the first pillar is sound disease knowledge. This is melanoma, but of course, if you have another cancer, it's going to be another cancer or another disease. In the middle pillar, I call it systems, and that's obviously a little bit of maybe a vague concept. But what do I mean with systems? Systems can be, how does your healthcare system work? How does research work? How are drugs approved in your country? So anything, we are all parts of systems, and if you do not know how your systems work, it's impossible. It's already hard to navigate them, and it's even harder to change them. So we pay a lot of attention to systems in general. And last but not least, tools, and where you're going to see one that has been very, very useful for us a bit later in this session, because it is often tools and skills that limit how successful we are in what we're doing. And that can be anything about, let's say, project management. How do I organize a conference? How do I give a presentation? But it can also get a bit more complicated, and I have a tool that we have developed for us, for our network, in a little second. So what we are doing is we cross the three, if you want, layers, nodes, hubs, and cores with these three pillars that you have seen. And actually, we have an educational strategy that covers each of these crossing points between these three pillars and the three groups. Now, you're probably wondering, so what does that have to do with uveal melanoma or rare melanomas? If you remember what I told you very early on, namely that we have a large number of different languages and not everyone can talk to everyone. And when I started MPNE, there was no such a thing as even a cutaneous melanoma organization in place, let alone a rare organization. And starting one from scratch in each of these countries is crazily time consuming and requires a lot of resources. So instead, what we felt as people were finding us anyway, because if anyone who Googled something with melanoma will sooner or later, at least in Europe, fall over us. So what we decided instead was to train the hubs of the network, so these red dots, about rare melanomas, that whenever someone would come to them with a melanoma that was not a cutaneous melanoma, but one of the rare melanomas, they would be able to direct them to the right place and would connect them with the right people from different countries, and who would know about, for example, reference centers in their own countries and expertise. We have then built on that because we have realized that rare melanomas between them have commonalities that are really, really important. A lot of the issues that uveal melanoma patients face are actually not even linked to being a uveal melanoma patient, but they're linked to the fact of being rare. And with that, they're shared with all rare conditions. So we spent a lot of effort connecting our rare melanoma patients with other rare disease patients, and we have benefited enormously from these connections. Genetically, so even if you look into the disease itself, there are also overlaps between the different rare melanomas. So we have now started, or we have developed a concept called MPNE Rare, which focuses on rare melanomas. And we run conferences that target rare melanomas, where we have separate sessions for the different types, and then sessions that will, for example, address genetics or precision medicine or rare cancers as a topic, where everyone then participates. And with that, we've been able to relatively, in a very, very short time, actually, to establish a system that is able to protect patients across Europe. And it's never perfect, it's never fast enough, at least for my liking, but then patience is not one of my strengths. But I do believe that this is a model that works, at least in our system, extremely well. I promised you I would show you a tool, one of the things what we call a tool. This is a tool that we developed, which is called, we call it V2A2, which stands for validity, verifiability, accessibility, and agency. And those are the four domains about in which we think about effective patient information. We assume that this is also a lot of the work you are doing, informing patients about their disease, about their treatment options, about the help that's available to them. And we have been approached so many times, and we struggled to kind of really define what makes information good, until we sat down actually and came up with these four domains, and also thought about how we could to communicate it towards others, external stakeholders. Validity, of course, is an easy one, and things have to be accurate. Verifiable is something that's very, very relevant for us, and I think in the age of fake news, and we have all seen what it can do to people and how dangerous it is, we pay a lot of attention that people reference the information they cite, for example, on patient forums. So we will always ask them, where did you find it? And we do a lot of education about what a reliable source for medical information looks like and what an unreliable source of information looks like. So a New England Journal publication or a Lancet journal, that's a reliable source of information. If you've somewhere read it on the web, not such a good source of information. My oncologist said that can be anything, but in the end, unless you have a reference for that, is still just an opinion. It's, of course, I mean, if you take a tabloid, that is on a totally different level. We encourage people to say, I read this somewhere, does anyone know anything about it? And then try to support it with evidence. We have managed to set this up as a kind of a rule, as a self-enforcing rule. So now we have a self-patrolling forum, if you like, where there's always someone going to chip in if we just happen to have odd claims on there. And I think that is the single most important thing we've ever introduced to keep our forums free of, well, relatively free of, rubbish. Two other factors that I think are very important is accessibility. Anyone who has ever gotten into reading medical information will know that typical classical medical text is not something we call accessible. We have been trying to drill down on what accessible actually means and how you can turn a text that is highly complex into something that is still valid, but has lost some of the unnecessary complexity. We actually have developed a briefing material. I always quote Einstein, if you can't put it simply, you don't understand it well enough. And that's what we send to our speakers. And that does, it tends to do the job. The overall aim for everything we do in this is to develop what we call agency. It's a term we prefer over patient empowerment, because if you think about it for a moment, patient empowerment means that someone hands over the power to this poor, helpless patient. I think that that's not an accurate version of how we should be looking at patients, and it's definitely not how we see ourselves. Agency is the ability to increase your range of options, and this is what we would like patients to understand. By educating themselves, by taking action, they expand their range of options and they take back some of the control that the disease has made lose them. So for us, that's kind of the desired state to go for. I promised you a tool. This is just the concept. So this is the tool. We basically turned it into items, which you can simply tick in a yes and no fashion. And we use this on our own text. We hand it over to others. It has now been published. There's a link that you find on the slides. We're happy to share the slides, of course, so you can read up on it, and you're free to download it. It is a Creative Commons license, so you can adjust it to your brand liking or logo, whatever you like. It's there to be used. It's just a guide. It's not an absolute tool. I actually use it a lot for my own text. You will have heard that English is not my native language, so I'm German by origin, and German is infamous for very long sentences, and it is something that is very, very hard to lose even after many years abroad. And I get reminded a lot by my colleagues, so this is actually a very valuable tool for myself. So we use it for ourselves, but also for external texts, and we train others in order to provide a structure in what a good text for patients actually looks like. Now, the session was about UMQ. So I would like to talk a little bit about how we think about patient involvement in research. And actually, timing is perfect. I've been invited by Nature Medicine to write a worldview on why patients should be involved in research. So you can read it. There's a free link to the author copy. So it's an open access version of it. I do believe, and I don't think I have to convince this audience that patients have something to contribute to research that no one else can, because I think everyone here understands how much a cancer diagnosis changes your life. It is just something that someone who has never been through that cannot fathom. And if we're not there to remind them, no one else will. And that's for me the reason why we should be involved in research. This is the project. This is UMQ. This is the website. This is just a last snapshot. And I would like to reflect a little bit on what it meant to be a partner in such a large project and in a consortium. I think it is fair to say, and Andrew can correct me if he disagrees, but I think it's fair to say that we have come a long way. it was quite a learning curve for everyone involved, because I think the original idea was, you know, you add a patient group to the research project and then they do some tweeting and they will put some stories out there, and otherwise they're going to be grateful that someone is studying their disease, and that's not quite us. So many of us have a molecular biology background, or I'm by training I've studied medicine, and I have a PhD in molecular biology, so we're not going to be sitting there and just being grateful, are we? So we are members of the Scientific Advisory Board, and we've been involved in all scientific discussions. And actually, because of our professional expertise, we have been able to contribute to the research itself. So we've been involved in all the discussions about findings. We have worked on the publications, so we are on some of the publications. There will be now a European uveal melanoma guideline coming out, and I am invited to be one of the authors, and another colleague of ours who's not on the call now, Ian Galloway, will also participate in that. So with time, what started as like, oh yeah, we need a patient, there actually has to become like to be a true partnership. And we're very grateful for this community that has grown around uveal melanoma that we didn't have before this project. So there are clinicians involved in the project, there are researchers involved in the projects, we are in the project, and that combination has really, really been helpful. So the researchers from the consortium have been at our conferences, have been reporting on progress, and I do think that I think we all have underestimated how complicated this would be and how hard it is actually to conduct research in an academic or in a purely academic setting. To really get started on the experiments, to line them up the way they were intended to be, and anyone who has ever worked in research is that things do take longer than anticipated. And we're finally now discussing the initiation of clinical trials, and we have gotten an extension of the project till next year because of COVID, obviously now. But I do think that that especially we from the patient side had hoped for something to be going way faster than it was. We have learned a lot about what I put on this column too, systems, how systems work. For example, how biobanking works, how hard it is to access samples. So I do believe it was a real crash course in research systems, even for people like us who have been involved as the researchers in other projects before. But being like a patient advocacy partner in there, I think it is something that we as community really have to pay attention to. Like, how is this entire ecosystem working? How is research conducted in this ecosystem, and what is good for us and what is not good for us? What helps to accelerate research and what rather slows it down? And to get vocal on it and to get educated on it and to make sure that our voices are heard. Now, in terms of, I have mentioned that we're involved in different research activities. This is a list of things we generally do. So we follow drugs, we're not just involved on the regulatory side, but we have been involved with project at the EMA, that is the European FDA. So the regulatory approval of drugs. We have been involved with HTAs, that stands for Health Technology Assessment Agencies. You might be aware that many countries here in Europe, we have covering healthcare systems, actually all of them, and many countries have introduced HTA to ensure that the drugs they are making accessible for the entire population are cost effective. So that has led to quite some issues with access or delays in access. So we are involved in that level. We are now involved not just about specific products, but we take part in general discussions around, let's say, trial design or ways how to evaluate drugs. We have been involved in several projects at that level as well, because we believe that that is the time we as patient community have to engage before there's a concrete product on the table where everyone has vested interest, so that we are better off to discuss. For example, one of the projects was called Get Real, was about using real world evidence in decision making, that it is better to start aligning and start creating understanding also for our needs at that level before there is a vested interest. We train research, we train in research, so we train patient advocates in research, anything from how to read scientific literature, how in very specific topics. Then we have run workshops, not just for melanoma patients, but across cancer, actually on scientific principles like, for example, precision medicine, technology, histology, so things that concerns us all, so that people understand actually and can take it home and then apply it to their own settings. We are involved in different pan-cancer initiatives. We're actually co-founders of a platform for umbrellas. So we are an umbrella. This is for melanoma, but there are other umbrellas involved. There are also rare cancer umbrellas involved, and EURODIS, which is our rare disease organization that also deals with rare cancers, is also partner in there. So we try to link up our rare communities with other rare communities so that there's mutual support. This is just a quick one. I could talk a day alone on this slide, so I'm not going to torture you with that. The important bit when it comes to research, and I think that applies to any technical setting, is actually that you want the right person in the room. This is another tool we've developed, is thinking about different axes or domains when it comes to the right person in the room. There's something like personal disease experience. We know how the disease has changed to us, so that matters, and that gives us a perspective no one else has. There's something about technical expertise that can become highly relevant. And then there's another function that is an abstraction from my own personal story to the group experience, because what I have what my experience might not be representative what happens to everyone else. And there are situations where it truly matters. If you want to improve the situation for everyone, you have to have a person in the room who captures the group perspective. And that's something that Andrew will explore in his part, how we can think about groups of patients in a country. So please pay attention whom you involve, and that's the red, what we call a patient advocate expert. Reach out to us if you're interested to learn more. We spent quite some time thinking about how we can make sure that we have the right person for the job, if you like. With that, I would like to thank you. That's my email address. This is our website. Please reach out. We're always happy to connect. Andrew, up to you. And now I probably have to stop sharing.
All right. Awesome.
Your turn.
So, just to quickly introduce who I am. So I am a uveal melanoma patient. I was diagnosed in 2013 when I was still living in the US. I was diagnosed and treated in 2013. I was treated at Wills Eye in Philadelphia. And I got actually involved with the Cure in Sight in 2013. That was my first, I went to one of the patient meetings just like this, except in person in Philadelphia back in 2013. And since then, a lot of things happened in my life. I moved to Europe in 2015, working with Melanoma Patient Network Europe at this point. But in terms of my background, I have a kind of a strange background, which puts me in an interesting position for patient advocacy. So I have worked both in startups on the business side, and I also have an advanced degree in biotechnology and bioinformatics. I was actually working in cancer diagnostics at the point in time that I was diagnosed with uveal melanoma. And in fact, I have the odd distinction of one of the diagnostic panels that I was working on was used to diagnose my uveal melanoma. The Ion Torrent personal genome machine, which I was working at Ion Torrent at the time, that device was used to sequence my tumor on the software that my team was working on. So that's not the way I like to test software, but you know, you do what you have to do. So like I said, I moved to Europe in 2015. I was actually going to work for a startup in Amsterdam. And so I got really immersed in startup culture during that time in the years from 2015 until now, where I learned a lot of tools and techniques for how startups work, how they approach problem solving with very, very constrained resources. Startups are not big businesses. They don't have infinite budgets and infinite amounts of time. They have very limited amounts of time and very limited amounts of money that once it's burned through, they're gone. And so I started to see some parallels in the patient advocacy work that I was doing. I actually got connected up with Bettina pretty quickly after moving to Europe because I was looking for, you know, where are all the melanoma patients here? I need to get connected to them. And I got connected with Bettina pretty quickly, and I got involved with MP&E. And I started to see parallels pretty quickly with how patient advocacy and startups work. So both are working with very constrained resources on short timeframes. Obviously, the longer we take to do things in patient advocacy, the more people die, basically, the more people are affected. So time is of the essence. You know, we don't want to waste precious time. And as with any volunteer organization or nonprofit organization, there's never enough money and never enough other resources to go around, and never enough people hours to go around. So the question is, how do we make the most of those limited resources? And in the startup world, there's this whole movement called the lean startup method, or the lean startup technique. And in lean startup, you really hone down on doing just what's necessary to learn the next thing, so that you can kind of run a loop or a cycle of learning and push your business, or in our case, our nonprofit, forward, and really hone in on what's most important to do next. So using these same tools that startups use, we decided to try to apply those things to patient advocacy. So we created this whole lean advocacy sort of program at MP&E, and we've been teaching that through our annual meetings. We've done that a couple of times now. And then we've also been applying it specifically to some of our projects. So we've had some projects. We had one project that ran in the Netherlands, for instance, which used all of these startup techniques very directly, and was successful. And we also have drawn on some of the lean marketing tools that are used to really discover who customers are. So if you're trying to sell a product or a service in a startup, it's really important to quickly hone in on who is your customer and what is the problem that they most need to be, they most value to have solved. So we kind of turn that around a little bit, and we look at it, you know, who in our patient world, who are the people who have the problems that are most urgent to solve? You know, how do we figure out what the problems are, and how do we break that down and prioritize it? And so to do that, we used, we're borrowing a technique from lean customer marketing called customer journey maps. And we've created our own version of it that we call a patient journey map, because we don't have customers, we have patients, but they also have a journey, right? So I'm going to share my screen here really quick, and I'm going to show you one that we've developed at sort of a pan-European level, but we're also doing this in our MP&E workshops with the individual country patient groups that Bettina was talking about before. Because remember, MP&E is not a patient group itself, it's a network of all of the patient advocacy groups throughout all of Europe. And so we're really trying to provide these tools through the network to empower the groups in the countries to do these things themselves. So let me just share my screen really quick here. And this is very small and hard to read. I will zoom in, but I wanted to give you sort of the overview of this first. So if you look on the sort of the middle of this the screen, there's a sort of rainbow headings that go across the top here. And what this is doing here, this is following the journey of a patient through their experience getting diagnosed, being treated for the primary tumor, and then the follow-up care that's associated with that, and then surveillance for metastatic disease, and then if unfortunately they should be diagnosed with metastatic disease, what happens then in terms of treatment planning, how does that metastatic treatment progress, and what follow-up care is associated with that. And then unfortunately, as is the case with some uveal patients, we end up with palliative care or hospice, and what are the things that that need to be addressed around that. So this is sort of the overview of the entire patient journey that's that's possible for all. Not all patients will go through this entire journey. Obviously, not all uveal patients end up in palliative care or hospice, and not even all uveal patients end up with metastatic disease. But if we kind of look at the whole community, this is the superset of all of the journeys that patients in the uveal community would have. So to just kind of also look at what is in the middle of this. So this map is broken up into some horizontal tracks. So there are the phase headings across the top, and then the bulk of this journey in the middle here with all the red and blue Post-its, which we'll talk about in a moment, those are the touch points. So those are all the things that happen in the journey. And then you'll see there's kind of hidden behind the Post-its there's a dotted line, and it actually has a loop in it. So that's sort of the path itself. If we were kind of going to walk the path of the patient, they're going to go along that dotted line. And then it's kind of off the screen here. Let me kind of move this over. The third line down there is external actors. So these are all the people who are not the patient, who kind of get involved in this journey at different points. So I'm going to zoom in here for a second. So for instance, I've got an ophthalmologist or an optician who might have discovered the disease in the first place. And then when we're over here in the primary treatment, we've got an ocular oncologist. We might have a physicist who's working on the radiation treatment. We might have a psychologist who's helping with the psychological impact on the patient and family, and et cetera. So all these little people in this track are those actors who get involved in the journey. And then down in this bottom track, in talking to lots and lots of patients, we've interviewed patients in the network and also online, and we've drawn some quotes from those interviews, and they're kind of stuck here down in this emotion track. So these are the things that people think or say, the patients think or say as they're going through these stages of the journey. You know, what are the reactions and the internalized feelings that they have as they're going through the journey in these different stages. So we've done this one for a lot of uveal patients across Europe. It's sort of a generalized view, but we're also encouraging our country patient groups, and some groups have already done it. In Sweden, it's already been done specifically for Sweden.
I have found it.
But let's take a look here at what. Yeah, did you find the Swedish one? All right, well, maybe you can share that in a moment then.
Yeah.
So in the touch points track, just to explain what's going on there. So the blue, I'm going to zoom in here again. The blue Post-its, these are just very matter-of-fact things that happen in the process. So these are sort of events that occur on the journey. So for instance, right at the beginning there, a nevus might be noticed in a routine eye exam, or further along, once the disease is diagnosed, the patient gets referred to an ocular oncologist, treatment is scheduled, all these sorts of things. These are just very matter-of-fact statements of events that occur along this journey. And these are key touch points in the journey. So that's what the blue things are. And then the red, appropriately colored red, this is what we call the pain. So this is all the stuff that patients have told us doesn't go pretty well in this process, clustered around those blue touch points. So for instance, if we look at diseases explained to the patient over here, the third Post-it along, right above it, we have this Post-it that says, Dr. Google says you're going to die, because this is sort of what happens with a lot of uveal patients. Probably people are recognizing this in the participant group right now. The first thing that happens, because there's at least certainly back when I was diagnosed, there was such poor information online, and it was so out of date that by the time you Google it, it's a much more dire picture of the disease than where we are now, for instance. So yeah, so information is often out of date is another post-it right next to it here. So I mean, you can see there's a lot of pain in this journey. But what this tool has let us do, I mean, I'm obviously not going to go through all of this, but what this tool has let us do is identify those pain points. So what are the kinds of concerns that people have, that patients have as they go through this journey? And then we can start to prioritize those things. So which of these pain points are causing the most severe problems for patients? I mean, which things are life-threatening? Which things are causing basically long-term damage to the patient community? And then we can kind of put these things in some order. We have another tool that we use for prioritizing these kinds of things, basically in terms of known versus unknown on one axis, and how much impact on the patient there is. So then we can kind of push things up into one quadrant, and those are the things that we need to address first because they have the most impact on the patient and we know the least about them. So it means that we need to learn the most about those things and address them. So these are the kinds of tools that we use for this. So if you look at this map down here at the bottom, it says get it online, and there's this bit.ly link. It says bit.ly/mpne journey. If you go there, you will get a blank version of this map. So it has all the headings, but none of the touch points and the people and the quotes and all that. So you can take this into your own patient advocacy group or network and work with your own groups of patients and make a map that maps to the special touch points and problems that are occurring in your country or part of the US, or in a subset of patients or just one patient group. And you can see how that compares to ours, because ours is also public. So you can look at the European one as well. And hopefully by building these kinds of maps, it really helps you visualize where are the places where we're stuck in advocacy. Where are the places where things really need to be kind of dislodged and problems need to be solved. So yeah, so that's an example of one of the things that we do. So I mentioned before also that we had a group in the Netherlands that used some of our lean tools. This is just one of many tools that are part of the lean advocacy tool set. Another tool that we use is something called the mission model canvas, which is based on the business model canvas that startups use, but it's basically just changing the terminology a bit so it's more applicable to nonprofits. And what that lets us do is figure out who the people are in our patient community, how it is best to reach them and message them, and what kinds of things do we want to try to deliver to solve problems for them. So when we're addressing these pain points, this is the kind of tool that we use to plan our approach for solving this problem. So for instance, in the early stage of this, of diagnosis, in this whole area of getting information and getting access to up-to-date information about where to proceed next and what it means and what's the psychological impact and all that. This is an area that's really quite messy in ocular melanoma to this day. Like this handoff where once you get diagnosed, there's sort of this gap where a lot of patients kind of fall through the cracks, and because everything moves very quickly and you're not given a lot of guidance in some settings. So as a patient, it can be very overwhelming. So in the Netherlands, one of the things that came out of looking at this journey was the need for a buddy system. So they basically designed a phone buddy network, and they used our lean tools. They used a mission model canvas, and they planned out and executed this phone buddy system that is now used by the Melanoma Association, Stichting Melanoma in the Netherlands, as an initial outreach to patients, and basically acting like a little startup. They got this thing off the ground and running, and into the got a presence in the ocular oncology offices in the Netherlands. So these tools.
And we use it, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I said the guideline, right? And the guideline, because Roger asked about what outcomes we're after. So we've done the same thing to prepare for this upcoming guideline that is going to be written about uveal melanoma, and we pinned down some areas that are really dangerous for patients and that we want to see covered in the guidelines. Like Andrew said, this handover where often patients get lost between an ophthalmologist and an oncologist, for example. So we specify these points and we say the guideline has to cover and has to address these. So that's an idea what we where we use it for.
Yeah, I mean,
so we get asked, Andrew, that's your job, by the way. You're supposed to share it afterwards because we got it in the chat. Yeah, that you know.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yep.
Super.
Yeah, you can get the blank one from that link, but I'll put the link in the chat as well. But then I'll also put a link to this one as well. And ignore the thing that says that the subscription is expired at the top. That of course that happens right before you give a demo. So we'll fix that. It works. But yeah, these tools will be publicly available.
I think the point for us is it's turning your personal experience into something that's very hard, well, much harder to refute. So we've done this like both online, we've done it in real. So we printed this on huge, and when people really did it, it's real post-its. So you can do it as a meeting, at a conference, and it really gets people to think. It's also good to do this when you have your oncologist there for a bit of a reality check. So it is really, first you generate much more insight than when you just sit down yourself. And I think it has helped us to argue our case. So we would really, I mean, that's one of the learnings. If you take something like this to a committee and say, this is what we've seen, we want you to address it, what are they going to say? So I think it's something for us to think about in terms of advocacy. And also when you get involved in research, I think being able to support our cases with data or a collection of it is really, really helpful.
Yeah, that's really key. And I think, one thing that, if there's a really big lesson from MP&E, it's being prepared when you go into these settings. So one of the things that MP&E has wound up doing is going in front of parliaments of different countries and the European Parliament, and having to really be on our game and make these arguments without sounding like we're just complaining or like we're just singing a sad song, but to have a really prepared case. It's almost like being a lawyer. You need to go and argue a case and be prepared and have all of your ducks in a row, have everything lined up. And these kinds of tools also help us do that. We come in and we have, we can visualize the problem space in ways that we wouldn't if we didn't have tools like this at our disposal. So that really helps a lot as well.
So I'm not sure what your main interests are, because I was like, please send us questions if you have something. Is there anything we have overlooked? We try to keep an eye on it, but there might be something that we haven't seen, Taylor.
Of course. Well, thank you both so much. There was one question that we didn't address in the Q&A. Someone wants to know, how can I tell if information I found online is accurate or not?
Okay, that's a very good one. Okay, thanks for that, actually. It's one of my favorites. So we have developed like a little tiny, like in a way, it's like a guideline, how you want to check it. So the first you want to see, and actually it is in this validity tool that it was too small to read, and I apologize for that. It is in there. So the first thing is to check the source, where it is coming from, and there are better and worse sources. And unfortunately, there's no quick fix to it that you see it. We don't have quality badges. And a very important factor that I can give on top of my head for someone who's starting out, check the source, go for an established journal. If you go for a medical journal, you can trust the information that is coming from there. that's quite hard to read as an entry material. So we have some online courses on how to read scientific papers, but even that might not be so much fun to do by yourself, because we usually do this in a setting at a conference. So we get people around tables with 4 or 5, and it's a bit of a competition because the results go online in a sheet. So, you know, you can make even fun out of that. I would otherwise recommend to sign up to medical information news services, where they summarize these things in like shorter clips that are easier to listen to. So that is something to check the source. Then the second type is something that's super important. It's date. Because often something that was correct 10 years ago, I mean, it was correct 10 years ago, but today it's totally outdated. So there is a sell by date or a use by date of medical news. And I think that's often something patients are not aware of. If you just do these two things, that's the first big step to go somewhere. We have started to form a little bit like a journal club. I mean, our UK colleagues do this really, really well. Actually, they meet up once a week, just pick a paper and talk about it. We do something a bit like vocabulary learning, because medical terminology can be quite intimidating, but in the end it's like learning another language, with the advantage that the vocabulary is actually quite limited. You'd never get by if you tried this in French or Spanish. But medical, honestly, it's not that hard. Once you have the basics, it repeats over and over and over again. So as a patient community, we have now term of the day where we repeat hard ones. We've done stuff that we print out papers for conference and put markers on the table and people mark them. And then we get them explained during the conference. So it's an iterative thing that is really, really important. So I think that's another thing to remember. Start with a good source, look for the date, and just accept it's a learning process. It's something you have to do and get back and do over time. And then you will be shocked how easy actually it gets, because this is something that, I mean, I find it particularly always very gratifying, because people come and say, I was here last year and I thought it was totally crazy, and this year I did it. You know, that feels good. I mean, then we've achieved what we wanted.
Perfect. Well, thank you both so much. That's all the time we have today, but for any of you watching, if you have any more questions for Andrew and Bettina, you can use the Socio app to ask them, and we'll be sure to post the links and resources that they've sent in there. Just go to their speaker bios. Thank you both so much. And now we're going to move into a 10-minute break, so I'll take you both off stage. Thank you.
Thanks for being here. Bye.